Welcome to the Sent from Disneyland podcast.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
If it's your first time joining us, welcome. On this episode, we'll take a journey into the past and explore Disneyland and Disneyland history with mementos, snapshots, and postcards sent from Disneyland from 1955 to the present. Today, I'm starting off by thanking my patrons from patreon.com. You can join and receive mail from my desk or from my Disneyland trips. Special thanks to Random Olive, the first patron to this podcast, and to the e-ticket patrons Tania, Eric Daniels, Joe Gamble, Scott Booker, Monica Seitz Vega, Russ Romano, Michael and Christina Cross, Scott Cagle, and Sheila Harry. C-ticket patrons Serious Inquiries Only, Debbie Weinstein, Jennifer Schneep, Grace Coate, Ben and Noel Bruning, Patty Wolin, Angela Reynolds, and Aaron Moran. B-ticket patrons The Disney Rewind Podcast, Jeff and Paige Orton, and Joshua, and Exorable Tosh Bell. And the A-ticket patrons, Elise Sharp, Zealot Infinity, Alexis Robles, Maggie and Henry Byers, Angel DeBlois, and the All Aboard podcast. You can also sign up for my new newsletter for a chance to get some postcards delivered by the USPS to your mailbox. I am your host, your post-host Clocky, and today we have 2 postcards sent from Disneyland. The front of our first postcard has the omnibus parked at the end of Town Square. Behind it you can see City Hall, and if you look closely, you can see one of the horses from the horse-drawn streetcars. On the back it reads, Disneyland Omnibus. Disneyland's 5/8 scale double-decker omnibus carries hundreds of passengers daily on a fun-filled tour. Camera fans especially like the unique angles the omnibus's second deck provides. It's postmarked October 15, 1963, with a Los Angeles cancel and a 4-cent purple Lincoln postage stamp, Scott number 1063. I assume they visit the park on Sunday, October 13, 1963, when park hours were from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. The weather was a high of 81 and a low of 53. Park attendance that day was 20,572. It's addressed to a Mrs. Howard Sargut of Akron, Ohio. It reads, Hi, the heat wave just about floored us. 106 to 112 degrees, worst in history of California. Our vacation was so hectic and was really not a vacation at all this year. We were in West for Harry's dad's funeral. All stayed at home or going up for 3 days. Just got a glimpse of the cornfields and buildings. Suppose you will go to homecoming in November. More later. Love, Sobu. Before we get started, I looked up the heat wave mentioned on the postcard. Sobu is referring to a record heat wave in San Diego at the end of September 1963. September 26, 1963 is still listed as San Diego's hottest day at 111 degrees. During my recent trip to the park, a friend and I were talking about the book 101 Things You Never Knew About Disneyland. I pulled the book off my shelf and flipped through it until I found something I hadn't mentioned on the podcast. The fact mentioned was about the eucalyptus trees behind City Hall, and how the trees caused Imagineers and Walt to redesign the park layout. If you look at original concept art and design drafts of the lands of Disneyland, you might notice that Adventureland was planned to be on the right-hand side of the park. Once the land was purchased and they began looking at how to build the park, there was a row of eucalyptus trees which would make a great backdrop for the Jungle Cruise. So the design shifted. The trees became the dividing line between the backside of Main Street and the backdrop of what is currently the Hippo Pool. As I mentioned in episode 142, Sent with Goff, the design of City Hall was based on a real courthouse in Fort Collins, Colorado. The original function of City Hall included lost children, first aid, and security. The 1956 guidebook lists City Hall as Town Hall on the map, but in the information section, listed as City Hall for first aid, lost children, and guest relations offices. Great news! Enfield Post is back up on Etsy. Grabbing some vintage stamps is a great way to plus your mail, whether you're trying to match the color of your postcard or envelope, or adding a themed stamp to the back of your mail. Be sure to check out Enfield Post. You can head over to EnfieldPost.com and explore all the different vintage stamps you can use on your next card or letter. That's ENFIELDPOST on Instagram and EnfieldPost.com for your wedding and vintage postage needs. Enfield Post is the official postage stamp sponsor of the Sent from Disneyland podcast. The front of our next postcard has a horse-drawn streetcar pulling into the end of town square. In the back, you can see City Hall with the eucalyptus trees behind it. On the back, it reads, "Journey through the good old days. Old Dobbin supplies genuine horsepower for a streetcar journey down Main Street, USA, where turn-of-the-century America lives again." It's postmarked May 21st, 1982, with a Seattle cancel and a 13-cent Flag and Independence Hall postage stamp, Scott number 1622. Based on the information on the postcard, I'm not sure when they visited the park, but I'll use the details about Friday, May 21st, 1982, when this postcard was postmarked. When park hours were from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., the weather was a high of 68 and a low of 61, and it's addressed to Edward F. Schmidt of Spokane, Washington. It reads, "Tuesday, May 18th, 1982. Dear Dad, we are hoping you had a nice birthday, but want you to know we'll celebrate it with you in about 10 days. My cold is much better today. I must say I'm feeling better than I've felt for a good week or so. I'm not exactly looking forward to the big weekend of digging and sewer laying I have coming up, but that's life, I guess. This past month of school is crunch time for me, so these will be weeks we are all trying to watch the Marco Polo series on TV on Thursday. I'll be at the Sounders game kicking for a total of $11. It would be great if I could make both kicks. Love from all of us, H. Received May 24th, 1982. Before getting back into the Disneyland history, I was curious about the Marco Polo miniseries mentioned on this postcard. Marco Polo was an 8-episode miniseries starring Kenneth Marshall and featured Denholm Elliott, Anne Bancroft, John Gielgud, Ian McShane, Leonard Nimoy, and David Warner. Originally an NBC production, it's currently available on the Plex streaming platform. When I was entering this postcard into my database, I noticed that this is the third postcard sent to Edward F. Schmidt that I've used for an episode, the other episodes being number 63 and episode number 73. In 1958, First Aid was moved from City Hall down to the other end of Main Street. Looking at a 1960 park map, Lost Children were also moved to the end of Main Street. The section on Lost Children reads, "Facilities for the care of children separated from their parents are maintained at the end of East Plaza Street. The matron in charge will assist you." Eventually, Lost Children would go back to City Hall. In fact, there's a sign outside for Lost Parents showing the Darling family from Peter Pan. Other than some of its functionality, not much has changed about City Hall from the guest perspective. I'm sure as the park has grown, the backstage has changed. I remember when Disneyland surveys would be conducted next to City Hall. Guests would be invited to use a computer to input their survey responses about attractions, food, entertainment, or anything about their park experience. Eventually, that changed to survey cast members asking a few questions and asking for an email address to send a more thorough survey. Now, surveys are just emailed directly to guests after visiting the park. This incoming postcard is sponsored by the Art Throwdown. Art Throwdown, or ATD, is an online craft hour on Instagram, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific. Be sure to check out Monday's ATD, which is usually hosted by paper artist Russ Romano. I've seen many amazing art projects, learned about awesome postmarks, postage stamp history, and a lot more on different episodes. It's great to stop in for an hour to watch someone craft or design something unique. Each host brings something a little different to each show. I'll list some of the regular hosts, or you can follow Russ Romano 2021 on Instagram. The front of my incoming postcard has my address and a pre-printed 6-cent stamp of Paul Revere. It's postmarked March 17th, 2023, with a Garfield Perry Station, Cleveland, Ohio pennant cancel, and a 42-cent Baloo and Mowgli postage stamp, Scott number 4345, and the pre-printed 6-cent Paul Revere Patriot postage stamp, Scott number UX58. It reads, "Hi Clocky, this Jungle Book stamp is the only Disney I have. It's kind of cool. I like the yellow color best of all. Thanks for your Sent from Disneyland postcard of Adventureland, the Jungle Cruise. So much fun. I hope you get to visit many more times this spring and summer. Greg." Thank you so much for the postcard, Greg. I'm not sure why it took all summer for this postcard to get to my mailbox. I see it was postmarked in March, but didn't arrive in my P.O. box until August. I did make a few more trips to the park in the spring, and even one last week to see Rogers the Musical. I'm getting ready for some fall trips in September through November, but no details yet. I do have a few postcards like this one, with a pre-printed stamp. I haven't used any yet, but I love the idea that you could just get one of these postcards, write a quick message and the address, then drop it into the mail. This particular postcard was from 1971. I also love the blue stamp too. Thanks for listening to Sent from Disneyland. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends. It would be helpful to share your favorite episode to a friend or on social media. There are over 200 to choose from. It would also help to leave a 5-star rating and comment at whatever podcast platform you use. If you'd like to support the show financially, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/SentFromDisneyland. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Sent From Disneyland, or on Twitter at Sent From Disney. For questions and comments, send me a postcard addressed to Sent From Disneyland, P.O. Box 44, Hood, California, 95639. This podcast is not affiliated with Disney, the United States Postal Service, or any post office or Disney properties. Opinions expressed on this podcast belong to its host and guests of the Sent From Disneyland podcast.